recording.
Okay, that way I can double check it.
That
I'll
helps.
start the recording.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
And so then, and I don't
Hospital
know of
here.
anyone who actually survived liver cancer.
Hospital here in
Maybe
town.
Yeah, St. Anthony's.
He says-
But, you know, and they invite chemo too.
Right.
Also, as a reminder,
If they can.
I've got some addresses on the desk for
So much of it.
Gene McPherson.
Okay.
This Sunday is his
Yeah.
90th birthday.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants an address, we can put those out there.
Waited too long to go.
In fact, I'll just go put them out
But
now.
then it was-
Sunday is times change.
You don't get to do hardly at all.
That's the only announcements I
I'm not
know.
guaranteed
Oh, you
that
know?
Tina did
Okay.
too.
Yeah,
Tina
and
was so long.
but she and so she didn't need chemo because she could have taken all but have given her maybe 6 months maybe. They were worse than what she had.
Yeah.
And so
We'll see down in like. She went so long because she didn't know anything. She didn't know anything was wrong until all of a sudden her belly just overnight, like 9 months pregnant.
yeah,
It was all fluid.
yeah.
That's when she knew there was something wrong. And that, you know.
Yeah. She knew, but her mother, her sister kept on trying to get, no. And my very good friend, who I just visited, her husband, he said, you mustn't let her, he was like that, he was very, he wasn't doing anything about it. But she was only 60,
Just turned 60.
and that's still pretty young. Yes, I mean, she had long, maybe the right. I know when Mom had the breast cancer, and then she beat it. Or she had surgery and all that kind of stuff. But she beat it, and then all about maybe 10 years later, they came back and they found out it was the breast cancer again. Which is kind of funny. People what she was oh, a little cell got away.
Yeah.
But they were good because that way they knew how they could treat that. But then it just was just too much. Mom's right. She really tried.
We'll see that like March. This last time was the 3rd time. That's it. You won't want to
But it hit.
But it got in, yes.
Yeah. Did she have the surgery?
Yeah, she has.
No, Mom had double.
I think Marcia had double.
Well, no, they only needed one, but she's just going to, but she had
Right.
just going to do both of them because she tried to go anyway. And the doctors felt he agreed with her. Just go on. And I said, Mom, this is the only time I'm glad I'm adopted. She said, well, me too.
Yeah.
The only time. Only time.
Yeah.
Because you name it, Mom had it. She never got colds or flu or just got the real bad stuff.
And Dale's mom, she had it. She did good.
My
We have many
my
long
mom's
time.
sister had it. I said, Mom, it's the only time. Me too.
Yeah.
So like how we're saying how we're God's adopted children, and I always like this. Well, that's how. Of course, Mom didn't give birth to me, but I'm an adopted child. But she loves me just as much as I know there's not that. Of course, I run 30 minutes on to the clinic, so
Yeah.
I know she loves me just as much as God loves me because we're adopted. But and all my siblings. So. I had twin brothers, but
Yeah.
they were fine, but more and more stuff is coming out now with all sorts of different cancers and stuff.
I know.
There's a lot more out there now than there
There's
used to
tons of
be.
different kinds.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's always the chance. You got to try at least. Yeah, and Mom worried about as how we were going to take that. My sister didn't. So well. So, yeah.
She knows she's but she doesn't know. Yeah. She's going.
Yeah.
I think there's something like that. She's going so mad. She told me once before. kids are telling me, I don't like it.
Yeah,
So
just,
I don't do that.
you just need to, yeah, that way you get prepared as you can.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
doesn't matter, see her, because by the time she gets cleared off from the city and they drain the food off of her, or give her
Yeah.
chemo treatment or whatever, by the time she gets back that way, she's just naturally neat and she's just at home. She's just at home. And so she doesn't take the time to stop by. But Jerry told me yesterday, I saw 30 years. I'm hoping he
will.
listen to her house rules because I don't know yesterday. She makes something up.
Yeah.
Hello, Pat.
You need to know.
I'm good. How are
I
you?
think of her more not knowing it the other way around.
I know.
At least she doesn't. All of a sudden, you know.
Oh, yeah, she knows. Yeah. And she's seen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What oil did you put in that? Peppermint? Keeps me. No,
I just put one drop. You put more than.
it looked like you spent a bunch in there.
Well, it wouldn't come out. It's getting
Oh,
low.
okay.
And it
Man,
has,
that's gonna be.
no. It has a little tiny hole
Maxine.
for counting drops.
Yeah.
So I just put one. Took forever to get that one. I was afraid to shake it. I did two of them.
It's too much.
We're already up to Genesis 32.
Thank you, Curtis.
Yes, ma'am, my pleasure, anytime.
No. Hi, y'all.
Hello.
How's Tina? Not any better?
Give her that thing.
Huh?
Give her that thing.
Oh.
It's getting not too bad.
Now, she's the one that built the house out there?
Mm-mm.
No, the one that
That's
lived out
Joyce.
there all the time.
Yeah, she's on Liz and Cheyenne. She's lived out there. Cheyenne all her life. She's the youngest one of all of us. But, let's see, her mom off of chemo. When they took her mom off of chemo for a while, that she
Hi, Stephanie.
pulled back and got to get better. So
Oh.
that's what we're hoping.
Yeah.
She needs a
Welcome
break.
back. She did a little bit. Hello. Welcome back. Oh, yeah. I missed it last Wednesday. Yeah. I missed it.
Oh, she's got a fancy fingernail.
Oh, not really. About
Like Halloween.
painted black.
They look ooky. What's this little spotted one? That's pretty.
Hello,
I
Isaac.
think
You look really scary when you're all upward.
I scared some people on
I
my team
don't-
because I did it while I was in the corner on phone calls. And we got up for
So
break and I turned
weird.
around and 3 people screamed and I was like,
Yeah.
what? They're like, I didn't even
You look like
recognize you
somebody
first.
beat you half to death.
I felt like it when I was trying to take it off.
All right, thank you.
I thought I was going to be permanently
Did
scarred for
not
a few
believe
days.
it was her.
Really? Oh, but you're.
Clock on the wall says it's time to
Yeah,
start.
her up and then it means.
Actually, it says it's 2 minutes past time to start.
That's my evil side.
The bell hadn't rung, so we're gonna start anyway.
There's your bell.
Never seen.
Well, apparently Jensen is sick tonight because Ron's making the announcements.
Jensen's here.
coming in, they
He's
came
here.
in behind me.
Oh, he is here?
Because his daughter drove, but he's here.
Well, that's right, this is
New month.
I'm sorry, this is November, so it's Ron's turn to make announcements. So, yeah, Jensen would be here. Let's see. Karen Stroh, she's still at home recovering. And John Nip called today, and he said that he is real short of breath yet and wasn't going to be able to make it tonight. So he was hoping to make it, but he's doing well. He just doesn't have his energy back yet. So that's the only ones I know. We're in Genesis 32nd chapter. And actually we're going to start at verse 23, but just to kind of go back a little bit and let you know, this is where Jacob is coming home, and he's concerned about Esau's anger from way back when he betrayed Esau or cheated him out of his birthright. And so he sent a peace offering in verses 13 through 15. He sent a peace offering of 515 head of livestock. And then verses 16 through 20, this is where Jacob was, as a husband and a father, was in the process of protecting his family. So he divided them up into droves, if you will, and he figured that if one drove was attacked, then the other drove would be able to escape. And so he was trying to protect at least some of his family, because he didn't know how Esau was going to respond to him. So that takes us down to verses 23 through 25, which we had read last week. We didn't get a chance to really discuss all of it, so we'll go back and we'll look at some of that tonight. And so let's begin. Father, that you'd be with our members who have physical ailments. We ask that you'd be with our sister Karen Stroh, that she might continue to recover. Be with our brother John Nip and Marcia Vincent, that they might continue to improve in their health. And be with our sister Terry's, pray that her health might improve, that she might come back and be a faithful Christian as you would have her do so. We ask also, Father, that you be with the family members of this congregation that have family members that are physically ill. Be with Florence's sister Tina Swartwood as she's in the hospital being treated for her cancer, and others of this congregation as well. We ask, Father, that you would use us as instruments, that we might reach out and help in any way that we can. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. Hi, Debbie.
Hello.
We're in Genesis chapter 32. We're going to begin at verse 23. And Isaac, if you want to read verses 23 through 25 for me, we'll begin there.
He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me."
Okay, now in your handout, if you're using your handout, it's on page 79, capital letter G, number 2, and that's dealing with Genesis. Actually, all of capital letter G, Genesis 32, 24 through 30 is what you'll be looking at there. But what we see here is that phrase there, he took them, he sent them over the brook. So the point is, having sent his family and possessions across the river, Jacob at this time remained behind. The man's name that we read about there, where it says, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. And we talked about that last week, and if you go back and you look at, or go forward and you look at verse 28, it says, and he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." And then you look at verse 30, and it says, "So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved." Yet, we'll not go to it, but if you go to Hosea 12, verses 3 and 4, which we read last week, here the Bible will later identify the man as an angel. This does not contradict our understanding that it was God. If Hosea's identification is to be understood as the angel of the Lord, he is confirming what Jacob believed about this encounter. Okay? Jacob at the point did not know immediately who this individual was. He just knew he was struggling with a man. And you see that phrase there, Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. What this implies is difficult to find out. It is not likely that it was complete luxation of the thigh bone. It may mean no more than he received a stroke on the groin, not a touch, for the Hebrew word egen, naga, often signifies to smite with violence. Okay? It was a significant strike is what it was. Okay? The stroke, even if comparatively slight, would effectively disable him for a time and cause him to halt for many hours, if not for several days. So it was a significant struggle, is the point that's being made here. The angel gave it only as a proof of his power and to show that Jacob could not prevail against this man. Hence, the blow was only disabling without being dangerous, and he was probably cured by the time the sun arose. Any comments or questions? All right, look at verses 27 through 29 then, if you will. And Ron, you want to read that for me, please?
So he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, saying, "Tell me your name, I pray." And he said, "Why is it you ask about my name?" And he blessed him.
All right, so as I have up here, over the course of a lifetime, it is possible for people to change from bad to good. The idea is that having fought to a stalemate, the assailant finally shows his superiority, that he is able to demand the name of Jacob and change it while refusing to give his name indicates this, indicates that he is superior. Jacob had asked for a blessing, but instead of merely blessing him, his opponent changes Jacob's name, thus announcing Jacob's new character and destiny. Similarly, Abram's name was changed to Abram and Sarai, or to Sarah, to presage the long-awaited fulfillment of the promise of the birth of a son. Abram's name was changed to Abraham, you remember. This goes back to Genesis chapter 17. Stephanie, read Genesis 17, verse 5 and verse 15 for me, please.
No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I made you a father of many nations. Then God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name."
Okay, so both these individuals' names were changed by God. And so Jacob's name has been changed to Israel. Why is it that you ask about my name, was the question here. When he says in verse 27, "What is your name?" he said, "Jacob." King James uses that phrase, "Why is it that you ask about my name?" This question most likely carries an undertone, if you will, such as, "Why do you ask? Don't you know who I am?" But at the same time, however, the context indicates why God was unwilling to give his name. The giving of the name implies submission and allows the other power over the name. God should not have to give his name. He was superior to Jacob, now Israel. Although chosen by God in the womb, Jacob did not realize his destiny without strife. For much of his life, Jacob relied on his own cunning rather than in the might of the Lord. And the crippling and the naming show that God's ends were still the same. He would have all of Jacob's will to win, to attain, and obtain, yet purged of self-sufficiency and redirected to the proper object of man's love, which was God himself. Any comments through verse 29?
Bill,
Yes, Pat.
We didn't read Hosea 12. What was that?
Well, we read it last week, but we'll read it here. Let's go to Hosea 12 and read verses 3 and 4. What it was is, I mentioned that in Genesis 32, it's identified as God, but Hosea 12 says it's an angel. You had that, Debbie? Verses 3 and 4?
He took his brother by the heel in the womb, and in his strength he struggled with God. Yes, he struggled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought favor from him. He found in him in Bethel, and there he spoke to him.
Okay. This was Jacob and Esau in the birth and everything. And you remember the struggle from the very beginning, and Jacob grabbed Esau's heel. Esau was born first, then Jacob. And so the struggle was there. Hosea identifies it as an angel, but that's my point, is that at this point, at the beginning of the struggle, Jacob really didn't know who he was struggling with. He just realized that it was someone who was superior to him. But when we looked at verses 28 and 30, we see that it is identified as God as to who he was struggling with. Okay? Good question. All right. Let's look at verse 30 then. And let's read verse 30 through 32. You want to read that for me, Pat?
So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he leaped limp on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that rank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the muscle that rank.
Okay. So we're just going to do what?
I think it's shank. I'm not sure what it is.
So look at John chapter 1 and verse 18 for just a minute. John chapter 1 and verse 18. And it says, no one has seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. That first part, no one has seen God at any time. And the question is, how do we harmonize verse 30 here with John chapter 1, verse 18? Because in verse 30, Jacob says, he called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face. And yet John 1:18a says, no man has seen God. So how do we harmonize those? Yes, Donna.
Maybe it was an angel. An angel was representing God.
Okay. All right. That's what you'd say, Isaac?
Yeah, I'm thinking more like the essence of God. Like, you might not have seen the being God. You might have been in the presence of the essence.
Wasn't Moses on Mount Sinai said he couldn't look at, no man could look at God in the eye and live. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you synchronize that with those two?
Okay. Pat? Yeah.
I might be answering a question if I give you another one. I don't know. This is what I had a cross-reference to. It says, then Moses went up on Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity. And I felt like that if Nadab and Abihu, being priests, God, could see this, why can't? Now I know the scripture just said nobody has seen his face. Even Moses didn't really see his face. There has one. Who was it said the essence of God? Maybe it's that. I don't know, but there's been so many glimpses that it just has to be something on that order. I don't know if you put it into a sentence.
Well, and I appreciate Steph. Oh, Ron?
Food for thought. There's exceptions to every rule.
There is exceptions to every rule.
Hebrews 9:27 pointed for men to die. But Enoch didn't die.
True.
Elijah didn't die.
True. And that's certainly something to consider here. Because there are, like Ron says, there are exceptions to the rule. Now, the word Peniel, anyone have any idea what it means?
Prince with God.
Prince with God or face of God is another phrase that I've seen. Okay?
That's right. Face of God.
Yeah. So,
Israel is prince with God.
right.
Right.
Israel says, I have seen God face to face. And what he's not saying, he's not saying, I've seen God in his presence. Because if you look at John 1:18, and you accept John 1:18 with face value that no man has ever seen God, and we look at Moses. Moses, of course, God approached him through the burning bush.
He saw the backside of God.
He's on the backside of God.
Yeah, backside of God, yeah.
Not
True.
his face.
So the idea is, no man has ever seen God, nor yet in a dream or vision, but in a most evident or sensible or familiar and friendly manifestation of himself. Israel recognized the power of God here. He had struggled with God. He had been defeated by God because God was sending a strong message here. Therefore, Israel says, my life is preserved. In other words, I am now well assured of my safety from Esau. This was the message God was sending him. I've delivered you this far. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to protect you. So Israel was concerned about his safety with Esau, and so now he's assured of his safety from Esau, whose approach threatened his life, or he speaks of it with wonder as others did, that he should see God and not be struck dead by the glory of his presence. That's the other option here. Okay? So, like Ron says, there are exceptions to everything. And so, we don't want to make an issue out of this. Did he see God or didn't he see God? What we want to recognize is what was the purpose of this whole struggle. And the purpose was to assure Jacob, now Israel, that God was going to protect him. God was going to preserve him because God had a mission for Israel. Okay? Now, just to show you, this is the location of Peniel right here. This is Gilead. He came down Mahanaim, and this is Peniel, or Peniel, however you want to say it. This is where the struggle took place. Yes.
I think that Jacob's he realized that it was God because he had the power to change him from being a deceiver or from the deal of Esau and him and before. And he didn't, he realized that this must be God. Nobody else would have the power to do that.
Okay. All right. So let's look at verse 31 then, that was read for us. And what I have up there, the aftermath of wrestling with God is wonderful. And we'll go back and we'll look at Genesis 28, verse 11 in just a moment. But the idea is, in addition to the historical note that Jacob, or Israel, forded the river at sunrise, having fought all night, this may be seen symbolically in two ways. First, it represents a new day of light dawning for Jacob, now Israel, after a long night of deceit and self-sufficiency. In other words, this is a spiritual awakening for Israel. The second thought is that it bookends Jacob's time away from Canaan as a period of darkness. The sun set on him as he departed the promised land, going back to Genesis 28, verse 11. Maxine, you have that?
And he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set, and he took of the stones of that place, and put them for his pillows, and lay down in that place to sleep.
Okay, so Genesis 28, verse 11, the sun set on him as he departed the promised land, having stolen the blessing that God intended to give him. Stolen the blessing from Esau, okay? As Jacob left Canaan then, he was deceitful and filled with self-sufficiency, and the sun set on him. at that point, he received his first vision from God and slowly began an uphill climb from that point to this one, where he reaches a new plane in his spiritual development just as he returns to the promised land. He's coming back home. So the scripture says in verse 31, and he limped on his hip. A dislocated hip is a difficult injury to overcome and often has a lasting effect. It is likely that Israel would carry with him a physical reminder of this night throughout the remainder of his life. Scriptures don't tell us that, but we see here in verse 31 that he did in fact limp on his hip. Yes, Isaac?
Could it be to do the same thing that pain in the side of Paul, that he asked him to remove that from him 3 times? God said, my grace
is sufficient, yes.
So,
we don't know what that pain was either,
yeah.
But certainly it was something that was bothersome for the Apostle Paul, and
keep him humble.
Kept him humble. And this certainly, if it was indeed lasting through the rest of Israel's life, could have definitely kept him humble. Whether it lasted through the rest of his life or not, it lasted long enough that it did humble Israel. And that's the important point here. Any comments on chapter 32 then? Yes, Don.
Do the Jewish people still don't eat the sinew of the hip by the thigh, or I guess from the cow or whatever animal they're eating?
Yes, the Jews still to this day will avoid that portion.
What exactly is sinew? Isn't it the muscle, or what exactly is sinew?
The sinew, I should have looked that
Whatever
up.
that is, they can't eat it. It's around the thigh.
Well, it's, let's see here. I don't know if I have. It's not the muscle. It's the
Ligament? Could it be
the
ligament?
ligament.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
what I was trying to think of.
Yeah, the ligament that holds it together. That was the word I was looking for.
Bone tight.
Yeah. Thank you, Pat.
So what do you not eat?
Do what?
The muscle that shrank.
The muscle that's
the
right.
animal, the cow, chicken, or
Well, that's
whatever.
what
Your
it said.
ligaments shrink. It's going to be painful.
Well,
You
yeah.
can't walk if it's
True.
It draws very tight.
Very true. Any other comments or questions on 32?
I guess it's okay to struggle with this, because I really am. I have for a long time struggled with this.
You're still struggling with it?
Yes, the Exodus 23:20. It's I send my angel before you, and it's all capitalized. And I'm thinking, oh.
You said Exodus 23?
Exodus 23, verse 20. And I'm just talking about Jacob. It's just, I know that Jesus is God. This is where I'm struggling right here, is the part where Jesus, this angel, is a messenger. But it talks about the power that he has. My name is in him. I don't think he's putting his name in just an angel, plain angel. It's in verse 21. And he says not to speak against him. He will not pardon you. Well, only Jesus has the power to pardon sins.
Okay,
Or transgressions.
what we're dealing with, beginning in verse 20, is God's given some instructions and promises concerning the conquest of the land at this point. And so he says, behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Beware of him and obey his voice. Do not provoke him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. In him being that angel, okay? Now there are some, if you go back and you look at the Hebrew word, many times when the word angel is used, it's referring to Jesus Christ, okay?
I think in this instance, it probably is.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't make sense of it unless it is Jesus.
And so if you go to verse 22, it says, but if you indeed obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. And this is what God is saying. I'm giving you safe journey as long as you obey me.
My angel will go before. It's the same angel. My angel will go before you. In other words, Jesus and God are working together for our salvation.
Yeah.
To bring it.
There's evidence that Jesus existed all through the Old
all
Testament.
through and into the New. To bring about man's salvation and teach them obedience and what they had to do to inherit this salvation.
Right.
So why couldn't this
And it
person
goes
he's
back.
struggling with be Jesus? That he's struggling with in chapter 32. Can it be Jesus?
Well, it could be.
Even though,
I mean,
I don't know. Eventually we got to see Jesus' face, but he was in the form of a man.
right. He was
He
in
could
the
have
form
been
of
in
a
the
man.
form of a man at that time, and he wouldn't have seen the real face of God.
Right. What we have to keep in mind is the Godhead
I
here.
know this is
No. Your questions are good questions, and maybe Ron wants to interject here, or Jensen, or somebody else. But when you look at the Godhead, going all the way back to the creation man, let us create man in our image. And so God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit was all involved in this, and they were all involved in leading the children of Israel to the Promised Land. And so what you saw there in Exodus. I'd have to go back and look at the Hebrew word, but I think, if I remember right, that is probably referring to Jesus Christ there as the angel. Okay. Here, when we look at Genesis 32, this is probably referring to God, but not necessarily seeing him face to face, although, as Ron mentioned, there are exceptions, and this could have been an exception. Just as Enoch didn't see death. And yet, when you go to Hebrews and everything, man was to die, but he did not die.
Or Elijah.
Or Eli, yeah. Ron?
Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, talking about the time of Moses and the Exodus, and verse 4 says, they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ.
Thank you. So that answers the question right there.
He was there a good bit of the time,
Yeah.
in other words.
And that's what I was thinking. I remember going back to the Hebrew word, and I thought that angel was referring to Jesus there. So thank you for that scripture. I've forgotten about that scripture.
Now, what was that, Hebrews?
No, 1
That's
Corinthians.
1 Corinthians
Corinthians.
10, verse 4.
Thank you.
Where the way this is worded is the sea is Christ.
Yeah.
It has to be. I
I mean, it has to be, but he's the only one that could do this. That God gave the power to do this.
But here's, and you've heard me say this before, this is a good lesson for all of us, and we know this, is that Pat brings up a good question here, and we see this verse, and if we just read the Bible enough, and we don't just take one verse literally, somewhere in the Bible we're going to find the answer, and that's what we found in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So,
That he was there.
yeah, that he was there. So thank you, Ron.
I just think what throws people off is the term angel.
Yes,
That's
1
the Hebrew
Corinthians 10.
word, also the Greek word when it appears, it just means messenger.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
depends upon the context, whether it's talking about an angelic being, or whether it is talking about, in this case, in some cases, a manifestation of the Lord himself as a messenger.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know that Jacob would have known specifically that about Christ.
That what now?
I mean, Jacob wouldn't have known specifically about the Son of God.
No, well, we're not saying here in Genesis 32 that he was wrestling with Jesus Christ here.
Okay.
That was Exodus that Pat was
Okay,
referring
got
to.
it.
And that was
What about
But the fact that he was
Yeah.
naming him as an angel was, I guess, the point. Even though we know it was him,
Yeah.
with capital H.
All right. Good comments here. Good questions. All right, let's look at chapter 33 then. And in your handout, this is on page 81. Victor Eskew uses the heading, and I'm not sure, yeah, Jacob finds grace in Esau's sight. He has 4 possible headings there. He has estranged brothers are reunited, a picture of reconciliation, a warm welcome, what a relief. The key verse that he uses is Genesis chapter 33, verses 3 and 4, which we'll look at in a minute. So that takes us down to the lessons that we want to look at. And the idea, when you look at verse 1 I have up here, to reconcile there must be the time when the parties come together. No two people or no two parties can reconcile unless they come together. And so we're going to see this in Genesis chapter 33. Imagine, if you will, the conflict of emotions that may have been aroused in Esau's heart here. After all, he hadn't seen Jacob, who is now Israel, for how many years? 20 years. And so, there's some emotions going on with him as well as there's emotions going on with Israel at this point. And so as Esau marches to meet his brother, with 400 men flanking him, he was conscious of his greatness because he was a man of war, if you will, with the memory of Jacob's treachery. Certainly he remembers that. And he was thirsting for revenge in the past with the memories of his twin with whom he was raised and spent many years. But he longed to see his brother. And that's always a positive thing. So Jacob's actions, though, do not mirror the previous plans of Genesis. Go back and look at verse 7 of Genesis chapter 32, where it says, So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two companies. So his actions here do not mirror the previous plans, where he divided the family strategically to save half of them in case Esau attacked them. Here, he simply divides them into three groups of mothers and children, with two concubines forming a single group for introduction to Esau. First, let's look at verse 1, where it says, Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. Okay? Now, you go down and you look at verse 6 and 7. I didn't put that up there, but let's look at verses 6 and 7. Here he says, Then the maidservants came near, they and their children, and bowed down, and Leah also came near with her children, and they bowed down. Afterward Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. So, he's divided them into three groups of mothers and children with two concubines, forming a single group for introduction to Esau. And that's what we're seeing there in verses 6 and 7. All right? Any comments on verse 1? I look at verses 3 and 4. Let's see. Whose turn is it? Lawrence?
Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept.
Okay. In your handout on page 81, go down to capital letter D, the question, what had Esau done to extinguish the anger that he had toward his brother? And of course it refers to Genesis 27:41 when Jacob left. And now, Genesis 33 verse 4. So, as I have up there, Jacob and Esau both show their respect and love for each other. 7 bows. What does that represent? Why 7?
Perfect.
Complete, perfect. And it was a token of respect customarily given to kings. So Jacob is given a token of respect here, and this could simply be a showing of extra respect for Esau. Or if Esau had already conquered the region of Seir, which that's a possibility, Jacob could be bowing to him because of his high position at this point. It is possible that all three emotions, pride, anger, and affection, at once swelled within Esau. But the conflict of emotions was brought to a climax when he saw his brother Jacob. When Jacob joins in weeping with Esau, the ice is broken. The brothers are reconciled, and verbal communication can begin. Wonderful family reunion of two people who were at a strange relationship, I'll put it that way, for quite some time. But absent makes the heart grow fonder. And when you haven't seen a dear relative for some time, it can change a lot of feelings towards that individual. And that's what we see here. So let's look at verse 5. And Donna, if you'd read that for me, please.
He lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, "Who are these with you?" So he said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant."
So now we see this relationship developing here. It's built upon showing one's interest in another person. Esau first asked about Jacob's family. If you really want to get to know someone and make them feel like they've known you for a long time, they don't want to hear you talk. But if you'll ask them some questions, after a little bit, they'll get to feeling like, well, I've known that individual for a long time. And this is what Esau's doing. He's asking Jacob, or Israel at this point, about his family. After all, Esau's never seen this family. Doesn't know anything about them. So he's asking Israel about this family. In 20 years, imagine the family that Jacob had acquired at this point. He had 2 wives and 2 concubines, and they all had children. And so Jacob attributes his success to God, but mentions only the children in his response. So let's look at verses 8 and 9 then. Well, I didn't put 8 and 9 up there. I put 10 and 11. But let's look at verses 8 and 9 for just a moment. Jensen, read that for me, please.
Then Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company which I met?" And he said, "These are to find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself."
All right. Favors are not needed in strong, loving relationships. Esau says, "I have enough." So Esau asked about the gifts that Jacob had sent ahead. Remember, Jacob sent how many livestock? A lot. 550 head. Okay? His question was not meant to learn information because the servants had already relayed the message. Remember, the livestock went ahead and the servants were behind, and the servants explained what the gift was all about. So Esau's tone is that the gift should not have been given. The point is, he's pointing out that he's a wealthy man. He doesn't need these gifts. And so he told Jacob to keep what he had for himself. All right, let's look at verses 10 and 11 then. Isaac, back to you.
And Jacob said, "No, please, if I have now found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand. Inasmuch as I have seen your face as though I have seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. Please take my blessings that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." So he urged him, and he took it.
Okay. So in your handout, page 82, capital letter I and J is where we are now. So, good relationships also thrive on generosity. And Jacob's gift is not just for show, but it is a sincere offer to Esau. So Esau's acceptance then would be the sure sign that he had forgiven Jacob. And they were reconciled to one another. In the Eastern countries, if your present be received by your superior, you may rely on his friendship. This is in the Eastern countries even today. If it is not received, though, you have everything to fear. There's still a get acquaintance here between these two a little bit, okay? So it is on the ground that Jacob was so urgent with Esau to receive his present because he knew that after this he must treat him as a friend. If Esau is willing to accept this present, all the fear can be erased. So in Esau's face, Jacob saw a reflection of divine mercy. Esau held over him the power of life and death, and Jacob was spared at this point. In verse 11, if you go back and look at verse 11 again, it says, "Please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." So he urged him, and he took it. So Jacob changes the word for the gift here. He now uses the word present. In verse 10, it says, "Then receive my present from my hand." Okay? Present in verse 10 would express the humility in the gift, or the blessing. Here expresses the goodwill in this offering. But the phrase, "I have enough," the idea is that it is a larger word in the Hebrew than that was used by Esau back in verse 9, when Esau said, "I have enough, my brother, keep what you have for yourself." And so when you see Jacob saying, "and because I have enough," in verse 11, it signifies that he had enough to spare of all sorts of things. And therefore, Esau needed not fear his impoverishment. In other words, Jacob, or Israel, is saying, "Look, my gift to you is not going to cause me to be poor. It's not going to cause me to be impoverished, because I have enough. So please accept this present." And so Esau accepts the present. Any comments through verse 11 or questions?
Were you saying that because of the way it is in the Middle East, if it were not accepted, then there would be no friendship or no relationship?
In the eastern countries, if this gift had been refused, then Jacob would know that Esau had not forgiven him, that mercy had not been granted. Okay?
It's like a slap in the face.
Do what?
It's like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? All right, our bell's probably going to ring before we get to the next point. But let's read verses 12 through 15, if you will, Ron.
Then Esau said, "Let us take a journey, let us go, and I will go before you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are weak, the flocks and herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flock will die. Please let my Lord go on ahead before his servant. I will lead on slowly at a pace with which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure until I come to my Lord in Seir." Then Esau said, "Now let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord."
All right, so Esau expresses two desires for Jacob and his party at this point. As an expression of goodwill, Esau suggests that they travel together at this point. But Israel declined because the children and cattle could not take the pace set by Esau's army. It is possible that the army would be somewhat annoyed by the slow traveling pace that would be required here by Israel because of his wives, his concubines, and his children, and the livestock they had. Okay? Remember that Esau's army was probably on horseback or some other mode of travel where they could move quickly. So Jacob suggests that each party travel at the pace that is best suited to their company. Jacob neither says nor does he imply that he will journey to Seir immediately. So Esau would understand and perhaps expect that Jacob would seek to care for his hard-driven family and flock before he came to visit him in Seir. Now Seir is another name for Edom. If you don't remember that, it's the dwelling place of Esau. And it is located below the Negeb, which is south of Beersheba. I didn't put a map up there of that, so forgive me on that. But it's south of Beersheba. And Esau suggests a guard to accompany his brother's company at this point. And Jacob replies that there is no need. If you go back to verses 1 and 3, or 1 through 3 of chapter 32, it says, "So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of the God met him When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp," and he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And so Jacob is replying here, Israel, that there's no need for this protection. He says that Esau's goodwill is sufficient for him. To paraphrase, he says, "I'm just glad that you did not kill me." All right, I guess that second bell rang.
I didn't hear it, but
I didn't either, but I hear everybody running around out there. Yes, Pat?
What does Mahanaim mean? Is there a meaning for that camp?
There is, and I didn't write it down. I'll look it up and give it to you next week, okay? I promise.
Thank you.
It's so hard to be cute and comfortable.
Unless you know it offhand. Ron, do you know the
I
meaning
didn't
of
hear the question.
Mahanaim? Do you know the meaning of that name?
No, offhand.
I'll look it up and I'll give it to him next week.
You're still here next week.
Yep, I'll be here Wednesday night.
So
But then I'll miss the next two after that. Yep.
It's right here. Chapter 32, second verse.
Oh, way up there.
Dale,
Yes.
where did you get the idea that he had an army with him? Because
Yeah.
I'm missing it.
Oh,
I never noticed it.
yeah, it's back in.
It's in 32, I guess, because
That would be an army, I think Esau had 400.
Yeah, he had 400 men with him, and that was his army.
Okay. You're calling it an army? or
Yeah, I'm calling it an army.
Oh, okay.
Because, well, go back and remember,
I sure love our class, you know that?
Double camp.
it's what?
Double
I keep trying to
camp.
get my brother.
Double camp? Okay. All right, thank you.
I think there's a better meaning than that, because I just can't, I don't remember it
Yeah,
right
they're
off
not.
either from the head.
If you go back and you remember the blessing that was given to Esau, Esau was told that
He would rule.
rule by the sword,
Yeah.
okay? And that's the only reason I say this is his army.
There you go. That was too far back for me. I wasn't thinking back that far. I'm staying in these chapters. So next week is.
We'll start with verse 16.
Literally, that's what it means.
That kind of makes me think of a division even then.
Well, and kind of there was a division because this is where everything began between him and Esau. So, yeah, you're right.
I've changed my mind, Scott.
In chapter 30.
About riding home.
Who's taking you home? Who's taking you home? Because I just told him I was taking you home.
Oh, shit. Isaac was going to.
You were further
I just
along
told
than I
Isaac I was
thought.
taking him home.
Or we got a
I'll
little
go
bit
tell him
faster
he's-
than I thought.
You're not.
Well,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna
I
have.
think it was just
you know, it's difficult to go verse by verse, so
I was gonna go with her